Okay, so the last section that we cover is pregnancy, development, and heredity. And we'll talk about development and pregnancy in more detail. We go over heredity very briefly since it's covered pretty well in 1406. But we'll still cover it. So there's some differences here. Development is looking at things from the embryo's perspective, and so we're going to talk about how are the different organs formed. And pregnancy is going to talk about primarily about the female and what changes she undergoes. And then heredity is the genetic information and how it's passed down from parents to child or offspring. So the first thing we talk about is the prenatal period. And the prenatal period is going to be everything before birth. And that's what prenatal means, is before birth. And it all starts whenever an egg and a sperm come together, and this is called fertilization. And so it takes about 38 weeks, uh, give or take some. And there are three periods within the prenatal period. There's the pre-embryonic period, the embryonic period, and the fetal period. And so the pre-embryonic period is just the first 2 weeks. And so this is going to be after fertilization. And so whenever you have a sperm and an egg, whenever they come together, this is going to form a zygote. And so a zygote is a diploid cell, and it is a single cell. And this is the resulting genetic material from the sperm and from the egg. And then this period ends whenever the blastocyst, and we'll define the term blastocyst here in a moment, essentially whenever the genet or the new individual implants itself into the uterus. So the second period is the embryonic period, which goes right after the pre-embryonic period. So it's from about weeks 3 through 8. And it's at this point in time that all basic structures are going to appear. And so, for example, the intestines aren't what they are today with the small and large intestines, the different regions. They're just going to be very basic, original intestines. And it's in this time that it's called an embryo. And following the 8th week is the fetal period, and this is whenever we will refer to the baby as a fetus, and it's just the last 30 weeks up until birth. And there's some research that says, that they are calling the first 3 months of a baby's life or a neonate's life the fourth trimester, because the baby still, humans, we develop a lot in the womb, but mentally we are still very immature whenever we're born. And so that fourth trimester is going to be helping to like transition the baby into a more independent lifestyle. Of course, they're not very independent. And so the study of, the development period of the embryonic and pre-embryonic periods together is called embryogenesis, and this is just like the forming of that embryo. So here's an image, and it's a good image to kind of show the whole life cycle. So everything starts off here with fertilization. And so it's at fertilization that the sperm comes together with the egg, and this is going to then be a zygote. And a zygote is the diploid cell that has the nucleus from the sperm and the nucleus from the mother. And this is going to be the brand new single-celled human. This cell is then going to start dividing. And so what it does is remember the egg, whenever it undergoes meiosis, it's going to divide asymmetrically, and so it's going to produce a polar body and another oocyte that's roughly about the same size as the egg. And so this is going to be the structure that carries most of the cytoplasm. And it also has all the organelles, because the father doesn't really contribute anything other than DNA. The mother is going to contribute the organelles that the cell is going to need. It's going to contribute a lot of proteins that the embryo is going to need as it's starting to develop the first time. And so this cell, whenever it starts dividing, it does so very quickly, and it's going to divide without any big growth phases in between. So it's going to just go prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, and then very quickly prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase over and over again to end up getting multiple cells that will end up growing and dividing later. So this one cell, whenever it divides, it's going to form two cells, And these two cells are occupying the same space, so there's an increase in the number of cells, but no real increase in the size of the embryo or the pre-embryonic structures. And then these two cells will divide, and this is going to form 4 cells. These 4 cells will divide, that'll become 8, and then it'll become 16. And then around this cell, between around 16 and 32, it's going to be this solid ball of cells, and this is going to have a special name called a morula. And so this is just a solid ball of cells. Around 64 cells, this is going to start changing shape. And so they're going to, divide into 64. And what happens next is this solid ball of cells is going to then, all the cells are going to kind of like explode. Now they don't actually, the cells themselves don't explode, but the size of the structure does. So these little solid ball of cells is going to end up forming a hollow ball of cells. And this hollow ball of cells is going to be called a blastocyst. And the blastocyst is going to have a little chunk of cells on the inside called the embryoblast. And this is going to be what implants itself inside of the uterus and starts developing further. So there is your blastocyst. With the trophoblast is the outer layer of cells, and the embryoblast is this inner layer of cells, the blue ones. So what we're looking at now, whenever we look at around week 3, so this is going to be that first 2 weeks. At around week 3, all the rest of these images aren't showing the trophoblast. This is just focusing in on that embryoblast. And so this is going to undergo a process called gastrulation. And so in week 3, you're going to take this clump of cells, and you're going to form a disc. And then this disc is going to start forming 3 layers. And then these 3 layers are going to start curving in on themselves and forming a tube. So by the end of week 3, you'll have this little tube of cells. And this tube of cells is then going to eventually take on the shape of an alien. And then this alien will continue to develop until eventually you'll have something that looks like a human. And so remember, the embryonic period goes all the way up until week 8. And so it's at this point in time that the embryo is going to have all of the basic rudimentary structures of organs. And then it's in the fetal period that these organs are going to continue developing and maturing, so that way the baby can then be born and be able to survive. And then after this, you're going to mature additionally, and y'all remember this because y'all did it. And then eventually, you might not have done this yet, but eventually you will produce or have the ability to potentially produce an offspring if you so desire. And then you will start this whole process over again by contributing sperm and an oocyte. And then if it fertilizes, then it would start all over again. And so this is the human life cycle.